If you're listening right now, take a deep breath. Let the air fill your chest softly, like the tide brushing against the shore. Before we begin, don't forget to like and subscribe to Historical for Sleeps, the place where history feels like a lullaby, not a lecture. And if you've ever found yourself wondering about the mysteries of time, the hidden meanings behind the myths, or the quiet truths buried beneath stone and story, comment 737 below, because tonight, we'll drift together through one of the oldest dreams the world has ever known, the war that shook Olympus, the battle between titans and gods. This is not a story of explosions or fury. It is the soft echo of creation and chaos, of love and betrayal, of silence before the storm. Imagine it, the beginning of everything. No cities, no fire, no sound, but the deep hum of eternity. The universe in its infancy was nothing but an ocean of potential, waiting, breathing, listening. And from that vast nothingness, something stirred. It wasn't loud. Creation rarely is. It was more like a sigh, the sigh of existence itself. From this breath, chaos was born. Not chaos as we know it, not noise or destruction, but the first emptiness, the canvas upon which everything else would be painted. From chaos came Gaia, the earth, soft and wide, her body cradling the space where mountains would rise and rivers would one day sing. Then came Tartarus, the abyss beneath, deep and shadowed. And from the whispering air came Eros, the spark of love, gentle yet unstoppable, weaving connections between all that would ever be. They say that Gaia, the Mother Earth, gave birth to the sky, Uranus, to cover her, to embrace her. Together they filled the world with children, some radiant, some terrifying. Among them were the Titans, 12 mighty beings vast as mountains, eternal as stone. They were not wicked, nor kind, simply the first of their kind, the foundations of existence itself. There was Oceanus, who encircled the world with rivers, Hyperion, who carried the light of dawn, Mnemosyne, who held the memory of all things, and Cronus, the youngest, cleverest, and most ambitious of them all. Cronus was unlike his siblings. Where Oceanus was calm and enduring, Cronus was restless. He felt a pulse inside him that even the stars couldn't soothe, a longing for something more. And from that longing grew a shadow, resentment. You see, Uranus, their father, looked down upon his children and felt fear. He saw in them the power to surpass him, and so he hid them, burying them deep within Gaia's flesh. Imagine the agony, a mother filled with life, unable to bring it to light, the weight of her own children pressing against her heart. Gaia cried out in pain, her voice rolling through the void like thunder. In her anguish, she shaped a blade of stone, a sickle sharp as the edge of time itself. She called upon her children to rise against their father, but one by one they refused, all except Cronus. The youngest stepped forward, eyes like burning gold. "I will do it," he said softly. "I will free us." And so, when Uranus descended to embrace Gaia once more, Cronus lay in wait. With trembling hands he seized the sickle, and in one terrible, quiet moment, the sky was cut from the earth. The first blood of creation fell, and the universe changed forever. From the drops that spilled upon the sea, new beings arose, the Furies, the giants, and from the foam of the waves, a goddess of beauty, Aphrodite. But from Uranus's wound came a curse whispered in agony, that Cronus too would be overthrown by his own child. For a time, Cronus ruled. He and his sister wife Rhea brought forth a new age, a golden one, they say, where humans lived without toil, without sorrow, without fear. The world glowed softly, as if the air itself remembered peace. But Cronus never forgot his father's words. Fear grew in him, like ivy around his heart. When Rhea bore their first child, a son named Hestia, Cronus looked into her tiny eyes and saw not love, but prophecy. So he swallowed her whole. Rhea wept, but Cronus would not listen. Each time she bore another, Demeter, Hera, Hades, Poseidon, he devoured them too, one by one, until only silence filled their halls. To the world, he was the ruler of the Golden Age. To his wife, he was a devourer of dreams. When she became pregnant for the 6th time, Rhea's sorrow hardened into resolve. She fled to the island of Crete, where the stars seemed to watch more kindly, and there she gave birth to her final son, Zeus. To protect him, Rhea wrapped a stone in cloth and handed it to Cronus. He swallowed it without question. The deception worked. Hidden away in a cave, the baby Zeus grew beneath the lullabies of nymphs and the hum of bees, guarded by spirits who drowned his cries with the clash of their shields. He learned the songs of the wind, the patience of the mountain, and the quiet rage of destiny. Years passed, and the world began to shift again. The golden age dimmed. The rivers no longer sang as sweetly. The air grew heavy with time. The earth knew change was coming. When Zeus reached manhood, he returned in secret, disguised, to the halls of Cronus. Some say he served his father wine laced with a potion of forgetfulness. Others say he confronted him with words sharper than blades. Either way, the moment came when Cronus felt his stomach churn, and one by one, the gods he had swallowed were released, reborn into the world once more. They emerged in light and fury: Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, and Poseidon, the first Olympians. Together with Zeus, they stood united, the children of rebellion and renewal. And so began the Great War, the Titanomachy, the war that shook Olympus. But let's not rush there yet. Before the clash of thunder and stone, there was a silence, that fragile breath before the first note of a symphony. The Titans, old as the world, ruled from Mount Othrys, while the young gods gathered upon Mount Olympus. The air between them shimmered with tension. It wasn't merely a battle for power. It was the echo of creation itself, the cycle that begins anew with every age. Zeus was not yet the god of lightning as we imagine him. He was still a son trying to understand the weight of destiny. He would stand alone on the edge of the world, feeling the wind rise from the same sea from which his ancestors had been born, and wonder whether his father's curse was already upon him too. Because deep down, every rebel carries a seed of the thing they fight against. Every revolution, no matter how righteous, becomes the rule of tomorrow. When I tell this story, I don't imagine gods as beings of marble or thunder. I imagine them as emotions given shape: love, fear, pride, tenderness, envy, longing. Cronus was not evil. He was terrified. Uranus was not cruel. He was desperate to preserve the order he knew. And Zeus, he was both their heir and their undoing. This is the rhythm of existence, the heartbeat of history itself. Creation, rebellion, renewal. Again and again, like waves against the shore. As the world prepared for war, even the stars seemed to hold their breath. The earth trembled not out of fear but anticipation, for it knew that through destruction life would be remade. Somewhere beneath the roots of the mountains, Gaia watched silently. She had seen her children rise against their fathers before. She knew what came next. Not victory, not peace, but change. And perhaps that is what all of history is, the gentle turning of a page written in fire and rain. A mother watching her children fight for the right to shape the world, knowing that one day they too will be overthrown. The Titans looked upon the Olympians and saw in them the reflection of their own rebellion. And maybe, just for a moment, they understood the sorrow of their father, Uranus. Tonight, as you close your eyes, imagine that ancient sky. Imagine the mountains shimmering under the silver breath of the moon, and somewhere far away, a young god looking up, feeling both wonder and fear. That was the dawn before the storm. The moment before everything began to change. The war was coming. The air was thick with prophecy. And in the stillness before the first thunder, even the gods must have felt something very human. The trembling quiet of destiny approaching. So rest now. Let your breath slow, like the tide returning to the sea. The story has only just begun, and what comes next will shake the heavens. Section 2. The world was quiet before the storm. The kind of quiet that hums in your bones, like the deep sound of the ocean pressing against its own edges. The air was heavy with waiting, the kind of waiting that only comes when fate has already been written, and all that's left is to live it. Mount Othrys rose in the distance, the throne of the Titans, bathed in an amber haze that never quite reached the sun. Across the sky, Mount Olympus stood bright and young, its peaks glinting like silver, the seat of a new world that had not yet been born. Between these two mountains stretched a silence so vast, it could swallow eternity. The gods and Titans were not so different then. Both were children of the same earth, born of the same mother's cry. Yet time had drawn a thin, invisible line between them, a boundary not of blood but of belief. The Titans clung to the ancient ways where power meant permanence and law meant silence. The Olympians, led by Zeus, were like the wind itself, restless, changing, filled with the wild hope of those who have not yet been broken by time. On the eve of war, Zeus stood at the summit of Olympus, the sky above him trembling with gathering clouds. He had not yet taken the thunderbolt in his hand, but the air already whispered his name. Around him his siblings gathered. Hades, his gaze deep and still as the night beneath the earth. Poseidon, whose eyes shimmered with the green blue of untamed seas. Hera, proud and watchful, her heart a quiet flame. Demeter, whose breath carried the scent of harvest and sorrow. And Hestia, the eldest, whose calm presence was like a hearth fire that refused to die. No matter how fierce the wind, they were not yet the gods the world would come to know. They were young, uncertain, and afraid. But fear, when held gently, can become a kind of courage. And on that mountain, courage was all they had. The earth beneath them shuddered softly, not in anger, but in acknowledgement. Far below, in the shadowed caverns of Tartarus, the great Cyclopes and Hecatoncheires, beings of immense power, stirred. They had been imprisoned by Cronus long ago, their strength feared even by the Titans. But Zeus, guided by Gaia's whisper, descended into that dark abyss to set them free. Imagine it, a god walking into the heart of the world, his torch flickering against walls older than the stars. The air there was heavy with the breath of forgotten things. The Cyclopes opened their single luminous eyes, and for the first time in ages, they saw light again. In gratitude, they forged for Zeus 3 gifts that would change the course of creation: the thunderbolt, the trident, and the helm of darkness. To Zeus, they gave the thunder, the power to command the sky to strike, to illuminate. To Poseidon, they gave the trident, a weapon to rule the seas, to stir storms, to shake the earth. To Hades, they gave the helm, the gift of shadows, to walk unseen, to move between worlds as silence itself. When the gods returned from Tartarus, the war began. It wasn't a clash of armies as we imagine it. It was the very world itself trembling, torn between 2 truths, the old and the new. Mountains rose and fell. Rivers changed their paths. Stars flickered like candles caught in the wind. For 10 long years, the Titans and the Olympians fought across the vast expanse of creation. 10 years where day and night blurred, and time seemed to forget how to move. Cronus, tall and terrible, led the Titans. His sickle gleamed under a sun that no longer warmed him. Beside him stood Atlas, broad-shouldered and unyielding, his strength said to hold the very heavens in place. There was Iapetus, the thinker, Coeus, the inquisitive, and Hyperion, the light-bringer, whose fire dimmed slowly as the war dragged on. Each battle was like a heartbeat in the body of the cosmos, a rhythm of birth and destruction. Zeus hurled thunder that split mountains. Poseidon's trident churned the oceans into storms that swallowed islands whole. Hades moved unseen, striking fear into even the most ancient of beings. Yet for all their might, the Titans would not yield. The world itself groaned under their struggle, as though even the stones were weary. But the war was not only of strength. It was a war of meaning, of what kind of world would be allowed to exist. The Titans fought for the eternal, for the stillness of the order they had always known. The Olympians fought for change, for the right to grow, to love, to err, to become. Neither side was wrong. Both were afraid of losing what they understood as life, and perhaps that is why the war lasted so long. Because when both sides fight to preserve what they love, there can be no easy victor. Sometimes I imagine that war not as thunder and fire, but as 2 waves meeting in the sea, crashing, retreating, merging, and beginning again. Each side reflecting the other's strength, each unwilling to vanish. Yet even the sea must rest. In the 10th year, the world was tired. The forests had fallen silent, the rivers ran thick with dust, and the stars above flickered weakly, as if uncertain they could endure another dawn. It was then that Gaia spoke again, her voice deep as the roots of time. "The cycle must continue," she whispered. "Let change be born." Zeus heard her, and with the last of his strength, he summoned the Cyclopes and the Hecatoncheires to join the final assault. The Hecatoncheires, the 100-handed ones, hurled mountains like pebbles, their cries shaking the edges of creation. The Titans fell one by one, not out of weakness but out of weariness. Even Atlas, who fought until the sky itself bent under his arms, was finally brought to his knees. Cronus, proud and broken, stood alone upon the ruins of Mount Othrys. His eyes found Zeus, his son, his destiny, and for a long moment neither spoke. The wind whispered between them, carrying the scent of rain and the weight of memory. Cronus looked not with hatred, but with the hollow understanding of one who has seen prophecy fulfilled. He lowered his weapon. "So," he said softly, "it is done." Zeus nodded. "It is begun," and with that the war ended. The Titans were cast down into Tartarus, chained beneath the earth, their voices fading into the echo of eternity. Atlas was condemned to hold up the heavens so that sky and earth might never touch again. A punishment, but also a mercy. For even in defeat, the Titans were not forgotten. They became the bones of the world itself, the unseen pillars holding up the order they once ruled. When the dust finally settled, the air over Olympus changed. It shimmered, lighter, freer. The rivers sang again, timidly at first, as if uncertain they were allowed to. The earth exhaled, and in that breath, a new age began. The age of the Olympians. But victory does not silence prophecy. Somewhere deep within him, Zeus knew what his father had known, and what his grandfather had feared before him. That no rule lasts forever. That even the most radiant gods must one day face their reflection, and that time, in its quiet way, always comes for its children. Still, for now, peace returned. The gods built their thrones upon Olympus not as tyrants but as keepers of the balance between heaven, earth, and sea. Zeus took the sky, Poseidon the oceans, and Hades the underworld. Demeter tended the lands, Hera watched over marriage and devotion, and Hestia guarded the hearth, the silent flame that warms even when all else fades. And so, the world as we know it was shaped, not by a single victory, but by the endurance of those who dared to dream of something new. Sometimes, when we speak of myths, we think of them as distant, stories carved in stone, far from the pulse of our own hearts. But the Titanomachy is not about gods at war. It's about the moment every generation faces, when the old must give way to the new, when love becomes courage, and fear becomes understanding. Zeus did not destroy the past. He built upon it, and perhaps that is the quiet message hidden in the thunder, that creation does not come from denying what was, but from listening to it, and then letting it go. As the night deepens, imagine the sky after the war, vast, silent, filled with stars that had survived the storm. Each star a memory, a whisper of what once was glowing softly in the darkness. And below them, the gods of Olympus watching, perhaps a little awed, perhaps a little afraid, of what they themselves had become. Because victory is never just triumph. It's also the burden of knowing that peace is temporary. That one day your name too will be whispered as myth by voices softer than the wind. So rest now. The war has ended, but the story has not. The age of the Titans has faded, and a new dawn rises on Olympus. Yet in that dawn, the shadows of prophecy still linger. And in the stillness of the night, if you listen closely, you can almost hear the faint hum of time, the sound of eternity turning another page. Section 3, the war was over. The heavens had quieted. But peace, true peace, is never silence. It is a fragile hum, a soft note lingering after the storm's last cry. The Titans were gone, swallowed by the shadows of Tartarus, their thrones abandoned, their songs unfinished. And above the trembling world, upon the radiant peaks of Olympus, the young gods began to build anew. Zeus, with the thunder still warm in his hand, looked out upon the earth. It was scarred and weary but alive, forests bent under the smoke of war. Rivers ran sluggishly, their voices hoarse from carrying the weight of ruin. Yet even then the world was beautiful, like a candle still burning after the wind has passed. The gods descended among it not as conquerors, but as caretakers of something fragile and miraculous, a new beginning. They built their halls of light upon the mountain's crown, where the air itself seemed to shimmer with song. The Cyclopes, freed from darkness, forged palaces of gold and silver that caught the dawn like mirrors. The winds became messengers, the clouds chariots, the sun and moon, twin lanterns carried across the heavens by divine hands. The world breathed again, slowly, cautiously, as though remembering how. The first age of Olympus was not one of chaos, but of order. Zeus divided realms among his siblings, not out of favoritism, but necessity. The balance had to be restored, lest the world collapse again into void. The sky, vast, infinite, commanding, became his own. The sea, restless and deep, belonged to Poseidon, whose moods could shape tides and tempests alike. And the underworld, dark but not evil, was given to Hades, the silent keeper of all endings. For though his realm was hidden beneath the earth, it was no prison. It was the necessary shadow of life, the place where memory rests, where every flame eventually returns. And Hades, misunderstood by mortals, was not cruel. He was gentle in his stillness, the one who never lied, who took nothing but what was already promised by time. Demeter wandered the fields, her footsteps waking seeds that had lain dormant since the war. From her hands came wheat, barley, and the golden hum of harvest. Wherever she walked, green followed, though her eyes often carried a faraway sorrow. as if she already knew that joy and loss always walk side by side. Hera, queen of Olympus, stood beside Zeus, not as shadow, but as will. She was the echo of dignity, the flame of loyalty that endures even through storms. Yet in her heart, there flickered the quiet ache of love tied to power, a wound as old as time, one that would whisper through centuries. And Hestia, gentle Hestia, sat at the heart of Olympus. She did not seek thrones or glory. Her gift was smaller, or so it seemed. She tended the eternal flame, the hearth that warmed both gods and mortals. Her fire never roared, it glowed. It whispered the simple truth that all homes, all hearts, are born from warmth and peace. For a time, the world was still. The air carried laughter. The stars seemed brighter, closer. Yet the gods, though radiant, were not immune to the same longing that hums in human souls. The yearning to create something that mirrors their own wonder. And so from the breath of divine thought, the idea of humanity was born. The story says that Zeus, in his high halls, spoke to the others. The earth is whole, but silent. Let it speak. And from this wish came two brothers, sons of the Titan Iapetus, spared from Tartarus for their wisdom and their mercy. One was Epimetheus, gentle and kind but simple-hearted. The other Prometheus, whose name meant forethought. He was the thinker, the dreamer, the one who looked beyond the horizon even when it burned his eyes. It was Prometheus who shaped the first humans from the clay of the earth. With hands steady and tender, he molded figures that resembled the gods themselves, not in power, but in spirit. He breathed into them not immortality, but something perhaps greater, the ability to hope. When they opened their eyes, they saw the world as a wonder. Vast, terrible, beautiful. They knew joy and sorrow, fear and curiosity. And in their hearts, Prometheus planted a spark that no divine thunder could ever erase, the desire to seek meaning. The gods watched. Some smiled, others frowned. To Zeus, it was an act of creation both admirable and dangerous. Humanity, fragile as it was, carried within it the echoes of rebellion, the same longing that had driven Cronus to rise against Uranus and Zeus against Cronus, now flickered in these mortal hearts, small flames that might one day become wildfires. But Prometheus loved his creations. He walked among them, teaching them the rhythms of nature, the patterns of stars, the secrets of seed and stone. Yet as he watched them shiver in the cold, their hands fumbling in darkness, he felt a pain too deep for words. They were alive, yet helpless, children in a vast, indifferent night. And so, defying Zeus's command, Prometheus climbed the heavens and stole fire from the sun. It wasn't fire alone that he gave. It was knowledge, the power to transform, to create, to dream beyond survival. When humans saw fire for the first time, their eyes reflected its light like stars reborn on Earth. They built hearths, forged tools, sang songs that echoed into the wind. For the first time, the night was no longer empty. But the gods are guardians of balance, and Zeus, seeing what had been done, felt the same fear that once haunted his father. "They have fire," he said. "Soon they will forget who gave them breath." His words were not anger alone. They were the weary echo of every ruler who sees tomorrow rising too fast. Prometheus was punished. Bound to a lonely cliff, his body chained to the mountain's heart, he faced the endless wind. Each dawn an eagle descended to feast upon his liver, and each night it grew again. Pain unending, repentance eternal, yet he did not cry out. His silence was not surrender, it was endurance. The kind of endurance that belongs only to those who love deeply and without regret. And in that silence, humanity continued to live, unaware of the price paid for their fire. Somewhere, far below Olympus, Pandora was being shaped. The first woman, they say, sculpted from beauty itself. Each god gave her a gift, grace, charm, curiosity. Zeus, in his wisdom or perhaps his sorrow, sent her to mankind with a jar, one she was told never to open. But curiosity, like destiny, is woven into our very being, and so she lifted the lid. From that single breath of defiance came all the sorrows of the world: sickness, envy, loneliness, death. They spilled across the earth like smoke. Humanity wept, for the fire that had once saved them now burned them too. Yet when Pandora, trembling, shut the jar at last, one thing remained trapped inside, a single small light that refused to leave: hope. And so, even as pain entered the world, hope endured. That was the gift Prometheus had hidden deep within the hearts of men. It was not divine, not eternal, but it was enough. On Olympus, the gods watched in silence. Some pitied humanity, others envied them. For in their mortality, humans possessed something even gods could not claim, the sweetness of impermanence, to live knowing that each dawn might be the last, and yet to love the dawn anyway. That was a kind of courage unknown even to Zeus. And perhaps in quiet moments, even the king of gods would look down upon the flickering fires of humankind and feel something he could not name, not pity, not fear, something softer, something close to understanding. The world, once shaped by wars of creation, now turned on smaller wars, those of choice and consequence, love and loss. The great battles of Titans had ended, but the quiet wars within hearts had begun, and in that, the gods saw themselves reflected. For though they sat upon thrones of marble and cloud, they too carried desires, jealousies, tenderness, and doubt. They loved, they erred, they remembered, and maybe that is why their stories still live within us, because they were never truly separate from what we are. They were the mirror and we their reflection. When night falls and you watch the flame of a candle trembling in the dark, you are watching the legacy of Prometheus. When you close your eyes and dream of something better, you're listening to Pandora's jar. Not the curse, but the whisper that followed it. Hope is not loud. It never has been. It lingers quietly like embers that refuse to die. And maybe that's what the gods learned too, that to create is to risk sorrow, but to love is to accept it. That even the mightiest need warmth, and even the immortal can be moved by a single human breath. As the stars gather above Olympus, the gods sit in their golden halls, and for a moment, everything is still again. The world turns softly, carried by unseen hands. The rivers murmur, the fire glows. Somewhere, a mortal whispers a prayer, not for power, but for peace. And perhaps if you listen closely, you can almost hear the gods answer. Not in thunder, not in flame, but in the hush of the wind that moves through the trees at night. The same wind that once carried Prometheus's breath. The same whisper that still says, "You were made from earth and hope." And that is enough. Sleep now, traveler. The dawn will come again. The story is far from over. For even in peace, the seeds of the next storm are already sown. Section 4, the fire of the world had settled into rhythm. Days turned softly into nights, and nights folded back into dawn. The scars of the Titanomachy faded under forests newly grown, rivers that healed their banks, and mortals who built fires against the wind. Olympus stood above it all, not as a fortress but as a promise. The promise that order had finally come to the universe. But order, like light, casts shadows. In the golden halls of Olympus, the gods learned to rule. They learned too to be ruled by their own hearts, their tempers, their longings. The air was filled with music, laughter, feasts that lasted as long as the stars shone. Yet beneath the harmony, something trembled, because peace is never only the absence of war. It is the delicate dance between what is right and what is feared. Zeus, king of gods, sat upon his throne of stormlight. He had brought balance to heaven, sea, and earth. Yet balance is a weight, and even gods are not immune to its burden. His thunderbolt rested beside him like a sleeping lion, a reminder that justice, once woken, is hard to calm again. He was the ruler of the skies, but also of choices, and that is the hardest rule of all. For the sky sees everything. It sees cruelty, deceit, yearning, and grace. It sees what mortals do when they believe no one watches. And sometimes Zeus would look down and see beauty in them, the fire of love, the courage of creation. Other times he saw hubris, the defiance of man rising higher than the mountains, reaching for what was not meant to be theirs. He remembered Prometheus. The chains, the eagle's cry against the wind, the echo of rebellion that still haunted his sleep. Power is not only strength, it is memory, and memory can ache. So Zeus sought order through law. He shaped the fates. 3 sisters who wove, measured, and cut the threads of every life. Clotho spun the beginning, Lachesis measured the span, and Atropos severed the end. Even the gods bowed to their silent craft. For though Zeus ruled the heavens, even he could not undo the thread once it was cut. There was wisdom in it, and sorrow too. Because to rule is to watch all things move toward their destined end. The sun may rise, but it also sets. The ocean may swell, but it too recedes. Even love, eternal as it feels, is a tide that must one day rest. Zeus knew this. He carried it quietly, the weight of knowing that perfection could never last. Hera watched him often from the marble steps of Olympus. Her gaze was sharp, her heart unyielding. She loved her husband as fiercely as she resented his distance. For in Zeus's eyes she saw the storm. Brilliant, boundless, but never still. He loved deeply but not wholly. His affection scattered across sky and earth like rain. Hera's jealousy, so often misunderstood, was not vanity. It was the pain of someone who loved order and found herself married to chaos. Her anger burned not from hatred but from longing to be chosen truly, once and for all. And though she was queen, her throne was never entirely hers. The myths call her vengeful. Perhaps she was only human enough to hurt, and in that hurt, new stories began to grow. Stories of gods who strayed, of mortals who dared love them, of children born between heaven and earth. Each one, in its own way, tested the balance that Zeus had fought to build. Among these children came names that would shape the world. Hermes, the swift and cunning. Apollo, radiant with song and prophecy. Artemis, fierce and wild. Ares, the restless fire of war. Athena, born from Zeus's own thought, wise and steady as dawn. They were not merely his offspring. They were reflections of him, fragments of sky given form. Each carried a part of his nature: creation, destruction, curiosity, pride. But what Zeus did not yet see was that in giving life to so many voices, he had sown the seeds of his own challenge. The more beings there were who could choose, the less control he truly had. It is the oldest paradox of creation. To make is to let go. Down below, humanity had grown bolder. Fire burned in every village. Temples rose from stone and prayer. Mortals spoke the names of gods in awe, but also in question. They had learned to build, to love, to suffer, to dream. And though they prayed to Olympus, they began to whisper among themselves about justice, about destiny, about whether even the gods were fair. The first philosophers were not men of scrolls or ink. They were farmers who watched the rain fall unequally, mothers who buried their children and asked why, wanderers who looked at the stars and saw patterns the gods did not explain. Doubt and that quiet, trembling flame had entered the world. Zeus saw it, and he feared it, because he knew what it meant when creatures began to question their creators. He had once questioned his father too. He had once been the flame. Now he was the law, so he sent signs. Storms that cracked mountains, floods that washed away arrogance, lightning that split the night. Not to destroy, but to remind. Yet even reminders fade with time, and mortals stubborn as hope learned to rebuild. They looked at the ruins of their temples and whispered, "Perhaps the gods are testing us, or perhaps we must become stronger." In their suffering they found resilience, and in resilience a strange kind of freedom. The gods watched, fascinated. Some pitied mortals. Others envied them. Athena especially saw beauty in their striving. She walked among them disguised as a traveler, teaching them wisdom, justice, craft. From her came cities, laws, and poetry, gifts not of thunder but of thought. She believed that strength lay not in dominion, but in understanding. Zeus loved her for that, though it frightened him too. For wisdom, once awakened, asks questions even the sky cannot answer. And thus, the realm of Olympus began to change again, not with war this time, but with reflection. The gods, once only symbols of power, became symbols of emotion, envy, love, loyalty, pride. They were mirrors for mortals to see themselves more clearly. And perhaps in that reflection, the gods learned something of themselves as well. But not all lessons come softly. There was a time when mankind's defiance grew too great, when kings built towers to reach the heavens, when pride drowned gratitude, and Zeus, remembering the curse of Cronus, felt the echo of fear again. He sent storms, punishments, and one day a flood so vast that the world seemed to begin again. But even then, one man and one woman survived, Deucalion and Pyrrha, guided by Prometheus's wisdom, floating upon the endless waters. When the flood receded, they cast stones over their shoulders, and from those stones new humans rose. Even in destruction, life persisted. Even in judgment, mercy remained. That was the paradox of Zeus. He ruled with thunder, but his heart still carried the memory of rebellion. He punished out of fear, but also love, the love of a father who does not know how to let go. The universe was vast, yet he felt its weight pressing on his chest. And somewhere in that vastness, the whisper of prophecy still lingered. That one day, his rule too would end. That another would rise as he once did. He could not see when, nor how, but he knew Time is not loyal, not even to gods. In the quiet moments after storms, Zeus would stand alone at the edge of Olympus. The wind would move gently through the clouds, carrying the scent of earth and ocean below. He would hear laughter from the halls behind him, his children immortal and unafraid, and feel a strange ache, not of sorrow, but of tenderness. For all his might, he knew what mortals never could, that eternity can be lonelier than death. Sometimes he would look down upon humankind and envy them, the way they loved fiercely because their time was brief, the way they forgave, even knowing pain would return, the way they built again and again, even when the storms took everything. That was their defiance, and their beauty. He, the god of thunder, could summon lightning with a gesture, yet he could not summon the warmth of their small fires, the kind that flickered in mortal homes, where laughter and silence lived side by side. And maybe that's what made him continue. To watch over them, to rage and to forgive again and again, because somewhere deep in that mortal fragility, he saw the reflection of everything divine. The Titans had fought for power, the gods ruled for order, but humankind, they lived for meaning. And that, Zeus realized, might be the truest form of immortality. So as the stars wheeled above Olympus, he sat back upon his throne, thunder murmuring softly in his grasp, not as threat, but as heartbeat. The war was long past, the world was alive. Yet somewhere in the wind he could almost hear a whisper, faint, familiar, like his father's voice, like the echo of time itself. Remember, even the King of Heaven must bow to what comes next. Zeus closed his eyes. The sky turned silver, and the earth once again dreamed beneath him. Section 5 time moved like a river through eternity, sometimes calm, sometimes wild, but always onward. The storm of creation had passed. The fire of Olympus now glowed steady, no longer blinding but warm. And in that gentle light, something new began to stir upon the earth. The age not of gods, but of those who dared to walk in their shadow. The age of heroes. It began quietly, as all great things do. Mortals had grown strong under the watch of Olympus. They had learned to sow and build, to sing and dream, to name the stars and remember their stories. The gods looked down and saw in them not mere worshippers, but reflections. Smaller, frailer, yet burning with a strange, unquenchable flame. For in the hearts of mortals, there lived a longing that even immortality could not understand. The desire to become more than they were, even knowing they must one day die. The gods did not know death, but humans did. And because of that, every moment mattered more to them than eternity ever could. From this longing were born the heroes, children of both heaven and earth. Some carried divine blood in their veins, others only courage in their hearts, but all shared the same thread of destiny: to rise, to struggle, to fall, and to leave behind a story that would outlive them. Zeus watched them with mixed eyes, pride and sorrow intertwined. For he knew that heroes were like lightning, brilliant and brief, beautiful and dangerous. They reminded him too much of himself, and perhaps that is why he loved them so deeply. The first among them was Perseus, the son of Zeus and Danae, born of a golden rain that fell through a tower window. His destiny was written in whispers long before his first breath. Sent to slay the Gorgon Medusa, she whose gaze could turn men to stone, Perseus did not fight with rage, but with reflection. Guided by Athena's wisdom and Hermes' speed, he faced the monster not head-on, but through the mirror of his shield. And when the blade fell and silence followed, the world learned something quiet but eternal: that courage is not the absence of fear, but the mastery of it. That sometimes to face the darkness, we must first learn to see it without letting it see us. From her blood sprang Pegasus, the winged horse, proof that even from horror, beauty can be born. And so Perseus, the dreamer who fought with reflection, became the first of many, the echo that would awaken others to their own storms. Then came Heracles, strong as thunder, but heavier with sorrow. His strength was both gift and curse, a divine echo that shook the world around him. Born of Zeus and a mortal woman, he was hated by Hera, who saw in him the constant reminder of betrayal. Yet through his 12 labors, each one a trial of pain and redemption, Heracles came to embody something greater than strength. He was not a perfect man, nor a kind one, always. He faltered, he raged, he regretted, but every time he fell, he rose again. And in that rising, humanity saw itself, flawed yet enduring, broken yet unyielding. When at last he ascended to Olympus, immortal at last, he did not come as a conqueror but as a weary traveler. His scars became constellations, his story a lullaby for every soul who fights against their own chaos. Zeus, watching, smiled. Not the smile of a god who feels triumph, but of a father who understands loss. He saw in Heracles the endless pattern of creation, the fall and the rise, the pain that teaches, the strength born from sorrow. And maybe, just maybe, he wondered if this mortal son had achieved something he never could: peace with himself. But the heroes were not only sons of Zeus. They were the living dreams of a restless world. Theseus, who united the scattered lands of Athens and walked into the labyrinth to face the Minotaur, a beast half human, half curse. Guided by a thread of love given by Ariadne, he discovered what all heroes eventually learn: that monsters are often not what we slay, but what we carry within. And Jason, who sailed across the wine-dark sea in the Argo, chasing the golden fleece, not for power but for meaning. His quest was not a straight path but a circle, as most are. For the greatest treasure he found was not gold, but the weight of his own choices, and the understanding that glory fades but memory endures. Orpheus, the musician who ventured into the underworld not to conquer, but to plead to bring back his beloved Eurydice. His song softened even Hades' heart, proving that music could reach where swords never could. Yet his tragedy, when he turned too soon and lost her forever, whispered a truth older than gods: that love is not about possession, but remembrance, that even loss can sing. Each story was a ripple in the great sea of time. Different faces, same soul. They rose, they fell, they burned, and through them, humanity began to understand what even Olympus had not: that greatness does not come from being eternal, but from daring to live fully within the briefness of existence. The gods watched, fascinated, sometimes fearful, for the heroes in their striving began to blur the line between mortal and divine. They reminded the immortals that to be perfect is not to be alive. And in the soft corners of their hearts, the gods began to feel something they could not name: envy. For mortals could change. They could love and lose, build and break, fall and rise again. Each life a symphony with an ending that made it beautiful. The gods, bound to eternity, could only watch. Their stories repeated, their patterns looped. Perfection, once a crown, began to feel like a cage. Even Zeus, mighty as he was, began to feel the slow ache of time. The world was changing. The prayers of mortals no longer sounded only like pleading. They sounded like partnership, like poetry. Men began to speak of justice not only as divine decree, but as something born within their own hearts. And in that, the gods saw a dawn they had not expected. One where humankind no longer knelt, but stood. Still, Zeus loved them. For all their pride and folly, he saw in them the spark of Prometheus, the pulse of hope that had once defied him. He remembered the chained Titan and understood now that the fire given to man was not rebellion. It was the beginning of understanding. The age of heroes was not an age of war, but of awakening. It was the slow realization that even gods could learn from their creations. And yet within that beauty lay the first whispers of decline. For when creation begins to understand its creator, the cycle turns once more. The fates, patient as ever, spun their threads quietly. Clotho's hands never stopped, nor did Atropos' scissors rest. Even Olympus, high above the clouds, had a thread of its own. The gods had ruled, but they too were part of the tapestry, bound to the same rhythm that moved the stars and the seas. One evening, as the sun sank behind the mountains, Zeus stood on the edge of the world and watched the sky burn gold. He saw ships gliding across the sea, temples rising, fires flickering in distant homes. He heard laughter, mortal laughter, floating upward like incense. And in that sound, he felt something he could never name. A kind of peace that did not belong to gods. A peace made of impermanence. He realized that the age of gods would not end in battle, but in forgetting. Slowly, gently, like the fading of a song. The heroes would become legends, then myths, then whispers. And one day, even those whispers would soften into silence. Yet that silence would not be loss. It would be transformation. The gods passing into memory, the place where all things that matter finally rest. Hera's eyes softened when she saw him standing there. "You look tired," she said quietly. Zeus smiled faintly. "Perhaps," he answered, "or perhaps the sky has finally learned how to dream." The stars came out one by one, like thoughts too bright to fade. The constellations of heroes, Perseus, Heracles, Orion, burned gently above, each one a promise that stories never truly die. They simply change their shape. And perhaps that is what the gods had always been. Stories too large for a single life to hold. As the wind brushed through the halls of Olympus, Hestia's flame still burned softly at its heart. Its light reached everywhere, even to the farthest corners of the mortal world. It flickered in hearths, in hearts, in every act of kindness and courage that humans gave one another. The flame that Prometheus had stolen still lived, not in the sky, but in the hands of those who believed, even when the gods no longer answered. Because faith, like fire, is not sustained by thunder. It lives quietly, in the warmth we give each other in the dark. The age of heroes began to fade, but its echoes lingered. In every story, every whisper, every star. The gods, once thunder and flame, became something gentler. Memory, archetype, dream. And the world, once divided between divine and mortal, finally became whole. Time would move on. The temples would crumble. The names of Zeus and Hera, Apollo and Artemis would become words in old tongues. Yet their essence, the truths they carried, would remain. Every time we love beyond reason, we speak Hera's name. Every time we seek wisdom over power, we echo Athena. Every time we forgive, we remember Zeus looking down upon the world with both sorrow and pride. And so the gods did not die. They became us. The river of time flowed on, softer now, slower. The heroes slept among the stars. The world dreamed, and Olympus, high above the clouds, stood silent but alive. Not as a mountain, but as a memory that hums within every human soul. If you listen, even now you can hear it. A soft, distant echo, not of thunder but of heartbeat. The sound of the divine still breathing quietly within us all. Section 6. The world turns still. Slowly. Quietly. The stars that once watched over titans and gods now shimmer above cities and oceans, over forests and deserts, over sleeping children who no longer know their names. The age of Olympus has passed. Into dream. But dreams, as you know, have their own kind of eternity. For nothing ever truly ends. It only changes its shape. And history, even divine history, is a circle, not a line. Once, long ago, the universe was born from chaos. Then came light and sky and gods who rose from the deep heartbeat of the earth. They fought, they loved, they wept, they ruled. And then, like all things that grow too heavy with their own glory, they faded. But not into nothing. No, they became stories. And stories, dear listener, are the most enduring of all creations. The temples that once reached toward the heavens have fallen to dust. The marble statues are cracked, their faces softened by time's gentle hand. Yet when the wind moves through those ruins, it almost sounds like laughter. The laughter of gods who have learned to live inside the silence. Because every time a human looks up at the night sky and wonders, the gods awaken again. Every time a poet whispers the name of a constellation or a lover promises forever under starlight, Olympus breathes once more. The immortals, it seems, were never lost. They simply found a quieter home. In us. There are moments in history when the world grows still enough for reflection. When empires fade. When languages crumble. When even the proudest myths turn to whispers. Yet through it all, humanity keeps telling stories. Around the fire, beside the sea, in the dim glow of screens and candlelight, we tell them again, not to remember the gods, but to remember ourselves, because we too are children of rebellion and renewal. We are made of the same dust that once dreamed itself into titans. We carry in our blood the pulse of creation, the defiance of Prometheus, the wisdom of Athena, the longing of Hera, the mercy of Demeter. We are not their worshippers anymore. We are their continuation. And so the myths live on, not as lessons carved in stone, but as whispers of the human heart. They remind us that power without kindness becomes fear, that love without patience becomes sorrow, that knowledge without humility becomes ruin. They remind us that to be mortal is not to be small, it is to be meaningful. For what good is eternity if it feels nothing? And what good is power if it cannot forgive? The gods of Olympus learned these truths slowly, painfully, through the mirror of mankind. They saw in us what they could not be, fragile, fleeting, yet capable of compassion deeper than any thunderbolt. And when the last temples closed, when the fires of worship burned down to ash, they did not rage. They simply rested. Rested, in memory, in language, in the quiet places where imagination breathes. They became metaphor, and then something more sacred still, comfort. Because a story once freed from religion becomes medicine. And what are myths, if not the soul's way of remembering how to heal? If you walk among the ruins of old Greece, where white stones lie under olive trees, you might still feel it. The hum of something ancient, not gone, just sleeping. The air tastes of salt and sunlight, and somewhere between the breeze and the birds, you might hear a soft murmur, almost like a sigh. It is not the voice of Zeus or Hera, not Athena's whisper, nor Apollo's lyre. It is something quieter, the sound of the world remembering its own story, the same story that lives in you. Because myth is not about what happened, it is about what always happens, again and again, in every heart, in every age. Every time a child defies their parent to become themselves, Cronus and Zeus live again. Every time love battles jealousy, Hera's fire burns anew. Every time someone stands for what is right even against fate, Prometheus smiles somewhere in the dark. And every time hope endures when all else fails, Pandora's jar gleams faintly under the weight of time. We are the living proof that the ancient stories were not wrong. They were simply incomplete. The gods were never separate from us. They were the language of our emotions before we knew how to name them. They were the reflection of our own becoming, and perhaps that is the greatest secret of all, that in telling their stories, we were always telling our own. Now, as the night deepens and the stars grow softer, imagine Olympus as it is now. Not a mountain of gold, but a quiet place between memory and dream. The halls are empty, yet filled with echoes. The hearth still burns, tended by Hestia's eternal hand. And there, in that timeless calm, sit the figures of what once was. Not proud, not powerful, but peaceful. Zeus, his thunderbolt long set aside, watches the horizon in silence. Hera sits beside him, no longer wounded, only serene. Athena writes in the air with fingers of light. Hermes listens to the wind. Poseidon hums to the waves that lap against forgotten shores. And Hades, calm as dusk, tends the garden of souls below, where nothing is truly dead, only transformed. They do not need temples now. They live in metaphors, in language, in memory. They live wherever someone asks, softly, "Why are we here?" And wherever someone answers, "To love, to learn, to endure." That is Olympus. That is eternity. Sometimes I imagine the gods watching us still, not as judges but as witnesses. They see the lights of our cities, glowing like constellations upon the earth. They hear our songs carried by the wind, our prayers no longer spoken to them, but to something deeper, the yearning to understand ourselves. And perhaps they smile, because in that yearning, they recognize themselves. For even gods once wondered, once feared, once dreamed. Maybe that is the truest legacy they left us. Not worship, not fear, but wonder. The same wonder that moves poets to write, lovers to stay, parents to hope, strangers to help. The same wonder that looks at a storm and sees beauty, not terror, not. The same wonder that listens to stories before sleep and feels at peace with the vastness of it all. Because that's what stories like these are. Not just myths, but lullabies for the soul. They remind us that chaos can give birth to beauty, that even gods can falter, that even endings can be gentle. They teach us that we are not alone, not in our pain, not in our love, not in our fear of time. When the ancients told their myths, they were not explaining the world. They were comforting themselves. They were saying, even the gods don't have all the answers. Even the sky trembles sometimes. And maybe that's all we ever need to know. The wind outside has quieted now. The night is deep, but kind. The moon hangs like a silver coin in the hand of the sky. Somewhere, far away, the sea still whispers against, The shore. The same sea that once bore the tears of gods, the laughter of heroes, the dreams of mankind. Listen closely. It is the same rhythm as your own breath. For all the ages that have passed, for all the stories we've told, the one truth that remains is simple, and it has always been this: everything that was divine was never beyond us. It has always been within. And so, the war that shook Olympus becomes in the end not a tale of power, but of peace. Not of gods, but of being. Not of thunder, but of stillness. A lullaby for the soul of the world. So, close your eyes now. Let the stars dim into warmth. The fire has burned low. The story has returned to silence. But remember, silence is not the end of sound. It is simply the space where meaning rests, and in that space, the gods sleep still. Not in the heavens, not in ruins, but in you. Good night, traveler. Dream gently. The stories will be waiting when you wake. End of the Titanomachy, the war that shook Olympus, as told by Historical for Sleeps, where history dreams softly.